Carolina Claire Levitt, an American activist and political figure who had fought for human rights for years, had always been confident in her mission. She understood that the world was changing and that even small steps could lead to significant changes. However, she never imagined that her life would be shattered by suspicions and accusations of corruption. Carolina was one of those who had given her heart and soul to helping Ukraine, which found itself at the epicenter of the war with Russia. She organized charity events, supported humanitarian initiatives, and directed funds to hospitals and refugee assistance. But her activities began to attract the attention not only of the public, but also of those who sought to use her popularity and ability to manipulate political processes for their own gain. One winter morning, when the snow covered the cities and streets, Carolina received a summons for an unexpected meeting with Judge James Morris, who seemingly had no connection to her. However, this time, everything changed. He had an important case. She had become part of an investigation involving her name, influence, and support for the Ukrainian government, particularly President Zelensky. Carolina was intrigued. She couldn't imagine what could be so puzzling in her life. No, she wasn't involved in financial schemes or illegal operations. But the accusations were serious, her activities, her support for Ukraine, and even her relationships with politicians were becoming the subject of an investigation for suspected interference in international affairs, particularly in aiding President Zelensky. At the meeting, Judge Morris, a middle-aged man with a cold stare who had a reputation for being strict yet fair, began by stating that Carolina had already been accused several times of actions that had supported the geopolitical interests of a foreign state. You, Ms. Levitt, have supported irresponsible political figures in Ukraine, he said, looking her directly in the eyes. And this not only threatens the security of that country, but could also violate U.S. laws. Carolina felt her heart race. She didn't know how to react to such harsh words. She was used to criticism, but this accusation had a completely different tone. It was an attack on her honor, on her place in American society. Your Honor, I have always been honest in my actions, she replied calmly, though she couldn't hide the tension in her voice. My goal is to help those in need. I don't interfere in the politics of other countries. I support people who are suffering. Morris laughed, but it wasn't a laugh of surprise or a joke. It was a laugh laced with contempt. Do you really believe this is just humanitarian aid? We are talking about huge sums of money, about influencing the political situation, Ms. Levitt. And what's more important, your connection to the Ukrainian government is still not fully clarified. We have serious suspicions about your involvement in lobbying the interests of a foreign power. Carolina felt a cold sweat spreading down her back. Her heart was racing, but she had no intention of succumbing to this pressure. She couldn't allow herself to. She couldn't let them call her a traitor. I am not a traitor, she said, raising her voice for the first time. I fight for justice, for peace, for people who have no other choice but to rely on external support. Morris watched her closely, his eyes sharp, almost cold. Time will tell how strong your truth is, Ms. Levitt, he replied, lowering his voice. And you'll see that all your actions will have consequences. Carolina left his office with a heavy weight on her chest. She was alone, but not defeated. She knew that for her it was crucial to make one right move, and that move could be the beginning of something big. She sat in the car, looking at the empty streets that led up to the sky, and thought that now her real fight was about to begin. The room was silent, with only the hum of the air conditioner breaking the atmosphere. Carolina Claire Levitt sat at a large oak desk in her office, her gaze meeting her reflection in the window for the first time in years. She was tired, but she didn't back down from her stance. Her statement that she was simply trying to help Ukraine in its difficult fight for freedom had now become part of the scandal unfolding around her. She felt the tension slowly cracking her nerves, but she still didn't let her anger take over. Her lawyer, a serious, unemotional middle-aged man named Thomas, stood next to her, reviewing documents. In his eyes, one could see not only professional coldness, but also a sense of anxiety. Everyone in the city was already talking about her, calling her an enemy of the people, accusing her of political manipulation. But this was far from the truth. Carolina, young yet already an experienced political figure who had always stood for the truth from the very beginning of her career, couldn't have predicted such a turn of events. From the outset, her support for Ukraine, which she announced a few months ago, was portrayed as an attempt to manipulate the country's political course for personal gain. The corrupt judge, whom Carolina didn't even know personally, had now become her greatest enemy. His accusations were simple and terrifying. She allegedly manipulated aid to Ukraine, using her political connections to pursue her own interests. Her words had been twisted and distorted, her motives denied. But she wasn't ready to sit idly by. This is absurd, Carolina thought, lowering her head to her hands, tired from constant meetings and consultations. This is all a lie. I only did what I believed was right for the country. My fight for truth should not end now. At that moment, an assistant entered. He looked confused, with a heavy expression on his face. He was holding a newspaper, and Carolina could see the weight of the situation reflected in his eyes. "We need to act quickly," the assistant said, throwing the newspaper onto the table. "Corrupt politicians have once again taken the initiative. This looks really bad for us." The public isn't just outraged, they believe these accusations. It's ruining everything. Carolina took the newspaper and read the headline, "Carolina Levitt, Traitor in the Service of the Kremlin?" Her heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let her emotions show. "How can we turn this around?" she asked, trying to control her voice. Thomas stepped closer and calmly said, "This is not just a legal matter. This is a fight for your name, your reputation. You can stand your ground, but you need to defend yourself on every front, in the media, among your voters, and with your colleagues." Carolina looked at him, understanding that with each passing moment, the situation was becoming more tense. She couldn't allow this conflict to destroy everything she had fought for. So, instead of clenching her teeth and leaving it to chance, she made a decisive decision. "We'll act openly. If necessary, I'll meet with journalists and answer every question. I'm not guilty, and I'll prove it." Thomas paused for a moment, then nodded. "You mean a public statement?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "I will speak directly to the public. They need to hear me personally." And so, a few days later, Carolina Levitt stood before a large audience of journalists. She spoke with cold determination as the camera captured her movements, beginning her public statement. "I have never sided with corruption. I have never sought to profit from the suffering of others. I stand for peace, for supporting Ukraine's just fight. No political manipulation can change my beliefs, and I am ready to prove that, even if I have to fight to the end." But it was at that moment that, in the background, journalists began whispering among themselves, and someone threw another question. "What about the corrupt judge?" Her heart skipped a few beats. All eyes were on her. She paused and responded calmly. "Crimes must be punished, but the truth will always be on my side." Carolina knew this was only the beginning of a great struggle. She had no doubt this path would be difficult, but she would stand by her truth. Carolina stood before the cameras, her words still echoing in her mind, and her heart racing from the tension. She had only just finished her public statement, and though she appeared calm, inside, everything burned with aggression and dissatisfaction. Did they believe her? Would they see her as a victim of political games, or as someone trying to deceive the country for personal gain? All these questions swirled in her head as she stepped out from under the cameras, her lawyers surrounding her from all sides. The hall was silent, and only the sound of footsteps on the marble floor disturbed the stillness. "Carolina, we need to be careful," said Thomas, the assistant walking beside her. He couldn't hide his concern. This is not just a legal battle. It's a fight for your name, and new accusations are bound to come. I know, she replied, pausing for a moment to figure out where to go next. But I can't sit and wait while all these lies continue. I should be silent, but I can't. I have to get to the truth. She approached one of the lawyers, who was trying to show her new documents accusing her of collaborating with unclear political entities that allegedly financed her activities. No one will doubt that this is pure political manipulation, she said stubbornly. They want me to give in and stay silent. But I won't. This is my country, and I will do everything to protect it. As soon as Carolina left the hall, reporters surrounded her. They tried to push through with questions about corruption, once again turning to her support for Ukraine as proof of her manipulation of power. Do you believe you're being used? One of the journalists asked, trying to provoke her. Are you ready to answer for your actions in court? Carolina didn't falter. She looked at the journalist calmly, but firmly. I am ready to answer for my actions. I am not afraid to deal with these accusations. I stand for the truth, and I will not let corruption games destroy everything I believe in. It seemed like these words only fueled the fire. The pressure mounted, and the country became even more divided. But Carolina remained unwavering. She knew that only honesty and open confrontation with corruption could restore justice. A few days later, the judge accused of corruption returned to the case. Speaking openly about her intentions was risky, but it was the only way Carolina could stop the manipulation. She decided to take the next step and file a defamation lawsuit, but before that, she needed to resolve one more important matter: a meeting with journalists. This time, she decided to make everything even more open and transparent. Carolina recorded a video message where she directly addressed everyone who doubted her intentions. I know that many of you believe the lies right now, and I understand why. It's hard when you're accused of something you've never done. But I am ready to do whatever it takes to show you the truth. I am not afraid, even if it means fighting to the end. The camera stopped, and she appeared unfazed, but in her eyes, it was clear how much she was fighting to be heard. She uploaded the video online and promised to speak at the next press conference. The next day, after a long night, in the same courtroom where it all began, all the key players in this game gathered. The judge, corrupt and prepared for his game, was ready to start new charges against Carolina, but this time, the situation had changed. In his place sat a lawyer who had prepared new evidence of his involvement in corrupt schemes. This was a major blow to the judge. Carolina entered the courtroom with an unwavering gaze. Everyone around her waited to hear what she would say. And she said, leaning toward the microphone, I am here to say one thing. The truth will always prevail. We will not tolerate corruption. We will not tolerate lies. I will prove my innocence, and anyone who tries to manipulate my name will get answers to their questions. The room fell silent. The tension in the air was palpable. Now Carolina was not just fighting for her reputation. She was fighting for the truth, for justice. And she was ready to go all the way. This was only the beginning. Carolina felt like she was at the center of a storm, where every step she took was under intense scrutiny. And every word she spoke was seen as another move in a chess game with an unpredictable outcome. She entered the courtroom and immediately felt the eyes upon her, sensing the atmosphere filled with anticipation and doubt. Many of those present were ready for her defeat. She knew that. However, she couldn't back down, even if it meant losing everything she had. In Carolina's hands were new pieces of information, secret records revealing that one of her biggest political opponents was not only involved in corrupt schemes, but was also funding campaigns that sowed chaos in the country. These records were supposed to be her trump card. But there was one problem. She wasn't sure whether it was worth exposing them, as the risk was high. Not only could it be a blow to her enemies, but it could also tarnish her own reputation. These documents had the potential to shake not only the political climate, but also her career. Before entering the courtroom, her lawyer, Mr. Yankoff, grabbed her hand, barely concealing his nervous gaze. "Carolina, be careful. If we go through with this, everything will change. We should proceed as planned, but not launch an impulsive attack." She took a deep breath. "I've already made my decision, Yankoff. I'm ready to risk everything. I can no longer sit back and wait for someone else to decide my fate." In the courtroom, the judge, whom her team had long suspected of bribery, sat in his seat. Everyone knew his bias toward Carolina's opponents was clear, but today his position would be crucial. His voice seemed ominous when he announced the start of the hearings. "Now we move on to your testimony, Ms. Carolina," said the judge, his eyes fixed on her. The entire room fell silent, and Carolina felt her palms begin to sweat. She stood up, never taking her eyes off the judge, and walked step by step toward the stand. Her steps broke the silence that had enveloped the room. She was no longer afraid. Though her heart raced, what mattered now was one thing: to lay all the cards on the table. "Your Honor, esteemed court, today I stand here not only to defend my honor, but also to tell the truth about the corruption in our politics. For all these years I have been used, but I am no longer willing to stay silent." Her voice was calm, but it carried a force that broke through even the deepest barriers. Whispers spread through the room, but Carolina stood firm. She presented the documents that supported her words and looked back at the judge. His face remained neutral, but Carolina noticed how his fingers clenched a pencil, poised over the paper as if preparing to write another important detail. "These are fake testimonies," shouted one of her opponent's lawyers, rushing to the microphone. "Your Honor, these documents have no legal value." Carolina slammed her fist on the stand, and everyone present flinched at the gesture. She didn't stop. "These documents have every signature, every stamp confirming their authenticity. And if you, gentlemen, are ready to call this a fake, then explain why there are records indicating connections to your colleagues. This is not a lie. It is not manipulation. It is a fact." The reaction was instantaneous. Her opponent stirred, and then the judge fell silent for a few seconds, and Carolina felt the attention of everyone in the room shift back to her. "These accusations, Ms. Carolina, are too serious. They could change the course of this case," said the judge, but there was now a shift in his tone. He was no longer as confident as before. "Your Honor, if you're not ready for the truth, then this is not my fight," she said as she left the stand, looking at him as though he were the person who could block everything that had transpired. But a sudden tension arose in the room. By that point, most of those present had already realized Carolina was going all the way. She had put everything on the line, and there was no turning back. The courtroom was silent. Carolina turned to her team, who were ready for the fight, but no longer as confident as before. Everyone knew this moment could change everything, not just their case, but the entire political environment. The judge spoke again. "The court considers these charges extremely serious. More time is needed to study the submitted evidence." His voice sounded heavy, and Carolina felt her heart tighten. She knew this was just a tactic, an attempt to buy time to gather evidence, rewrite part of the story, and break her down. But she had no intention of letting that happen. She turned to her lawyer. "I can't let them delay this process. We can't give them time for manipulation. Now or never." Yankoff understood the pressure was immense, but was forced to agree. "You're right, Carolina. If we don't act now, we could lose everything." Carolina stepped up to the podium again, her voice even more confident. "Your Honor, I demand that you make a decision immediately. This is not just about my reputation. It's about the future of this country. For all these years, we've watched them manipulate and destroy our lives with their schemes. And now we have a chance to change everything. This is my last chance." The judge looked at her, not surprised by her resolve, but he could already feel the choice between putting an end to this case or covering up the corruption becoming harder. Your Honor, I'll still have to review this decision. I can't make it today. The judge's words felt like a sentence, and Carolina felt the ground slip from beneath her. Everything she had worked for seemed to be in jeopardy. All her efforts, all these months of fighting, could be for nothing. But then she realized she couldn't stop halfway. And even if it meant losing, she would fight to the very end. In her hands was her final card. If you can't make the decision, I'll make it for you, she said firmly. And she submitted the document that would change everything. Her last attempt, her last chance for herself and her team. Her lawyer stood by, ready for any decision. The judge took the documents, glanced at them. And in the silence that filled the room, everyone realized this fight wouldn't end so easily. This court leaves the decision open. But I don't think this is the final word, the judge said, and it marked the beginning of a new stage in their battle. Carolina turned and left the courtroom, knowing that her decision had changed the course of the game. But many questions still remained, and the answers were yet to come. Now, all she had to do was wait for the verdict to see if her final step was truly the right one. Carolina sat in her office, not having left the documents for days, feeling the weight of everything that was happening. All her efforts, the years of struggle, seemed so fragile. She knew her case could end in any way. Just one small step, and her reputation and the life she had built could be destroyed. The next day, when it seemed Carolina had lost all hope, a message came to her phone. The judge had made his decision. She couldn't believe it was real. She opened the text of the decision, and her heart raced faster. Your Honor, I declare that the charges against Carolina Claire Levitt are not supported by any convincing evidence. These charges are unfounded, and I rule in her favor. All charges must be dropped. Carolina Levitt is not guilty. Carolina was immediately overwhelmed with immense relief, and tears welled up in her eyes. She knew this moment was a turning point in her life, but also for the society she had long tried to protect. Her fight had not been in vain. She had not only gained her freedom, but also influenced the situation in the country, changing something. However, the moment of joy was brief. Carolina understood that the court ruling was just part of a larger battle. There were political and media undercurrents she wasn't prepared for yet. But that didn't stop her. She smiled, sitting at her desk, lifting her head toward the light streaming through the windows. Her fight was just the beginning of a great change. She began to plan how to use her voice, her victory, to continue fighting for justice, not only for herself, but for those who were also submerged in the system. Despite all the difficulties, all she had endured, Carolina knew one thing. Change begins with each individual step, with small victories that lead to great ones. And even if she had to bear heavy responsibility, she remained true to her principles. Carolina Levitt had won, but the most important thing wasn't what happened in court. It was the path she was walking toward the changes that would come. Her fight continued. And although the verdict had been announced, the real battle was still ahead.